Welcome to Discover Energy Work. And today I have I'm very happy to have Enoch Li with me. And why am I very happy? Because Enoch has developed Bearapy, and Bearapy is all about bears and teddy bears. And I think it's a lot more about uh, waking something up in our lives and waking up a playfulness in our lives, but we're going to be talking all about that. How are you, Enoch? That's the first thing I want to ask you.
I think actually right this moment, I feel like I can actually relax now from my day. I've been a bit flustered the last 2 weeks with daughter getting ill and son getting ill, and also just talking to lots of different people as we expand the team of the business I have. So I feel a bit like, oh, okay, now I can have a chat with a friend. That's nice, connect
Right.
on a level.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And I suppose, yeah, I suppose we're all. Well, I kind of want to introduce you. So I've said Bearapy, but how would you introduce yourself to, or how do you introduce yourself to people with Bearapy? Or do you use Bearapy to introduce yourself? Probably not. Huh?
Well, it depends. I think therapy is the professional introduction in some ways. So I identify as a social entrepreneur, and therapy is the name of the business. And I'm sure we'll go into sort of why bears and all of that later. But I think also, in addition to maybe the professional identity, because I've been toying with this a little bit and I've felt a bit split lately of I have this image on LinkedIn, and I think a lot of people have that. Oh, this is everything we're doing, and then I wonder how each of us are actually doing inside behind closed doors. And I've been wondering, sort of, on the professional front, it seems lots of things are happening, and then I think if I had to introduce myself on a personal level, I would say, hi, I'm Enoch, and I'm a paradox.
You're a paradox.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I'm a contradiction or something like that.
Yeah, well, you're coming up with one of these things that I like to say is like we are veiled beings, like that who we say we are is probably exactly who we aren't. And, you know, and then when we have these interesting optical illusions, I call them optical illusions of the mind, which is where, for example, that their biases. So essentially, we think there's something called the curse of knowledge bias. So what we know, we can't imagine ever not having known. Yeah. So once we say have an experience, you've experienced it, you go, well, of course, everybody would understand that, and then we forget that at some point we didn't know it either, and we didn't understand it. So yeah, it's. And right now, yeah, I mean, I feel in a way, I was actually curious. It was going through my head, you're doing Bearapy. And as far as I know, bears in the American Indian tradition, the Native American tradition, they are about going inside. So it's hibernation, the deep dive into the self. Was there any idea of that when you started your Bearapy thing?
Maybe not consciously, because I didn't know about that tradition or that thought. But I think it does actually represent what I think therapy is in the essence, because on the outer layer, the introduction, that elevator pitches, we are an organizational consultancy and training company focused on workplace mental health. And mental health these days is quite a topic at the moment. And then you peel off one layer, then I can talk about how we help companies build sustainable strategies for mental health, how we help people with individual resilience, emotional awareness. You know, I'm in Beijing at the moment, so we're focused on the business in China. You peel another layer, then it's community awareness, raising awareness in this country, or even just starting with the city of, you know, this is a thing called mental health, and obviously the taboos and stigma that come with it. How do we relate to people with our stories, normalizing the topic? But I think if we keep on peeling the layer into, you know, going in, for me, it is also very much around the self-awareness and recognizing the different parts of ourselves, which is where therapy helped me walk out of depression, was starting to learn about the different parts of myself, especially the bits that I don't like so much, through collecting all these different bears that looked cute, and I gave them names and personalities, but in essence I was projecting myself onto these bears. And why I say that is because the outer layer of mental health, I think we can have knowledge and information, but if we don't understand how we are feeling, we don't understand our own thoughts, we're not aware that this is going on, then how do we know whether we are well or not? And because I can tell you, these are all the symptoms of burnout, for example. But if you don't know that you are exhausted, or you don't know that not being able to sleep and you're not having enough sleep and therefore you're short-tempered, that's a sign of burnout. And recognizing these behaviors, there is no connection between the information and the application. And I think for me, that's the essence of what we're helping people realize is, who am I, where am I, and how does mental health apply to me? And for me, where do I draw the line between this is persistence, and right now I'm just really burnt out and exhausted? Where am I fluctuating in my mood? Or when might this be what we clinically call depression and anxiety, and maybe we need support in whatever ways that suits us?
Yeah.
And so I think why I take to what you said about the native Indian philosophy, that it is about going inside ourselves, and it's not always pleasant, and it's sometimes a bit scary. And I think that's why, with the addition of the playfulness, it helps to also make some of this knowing about ourselves less threatening.
Can you talk about like how, like, your journey a bit, or is there something you're comfortable to talk about? Like, how did you get there? You wrote this book, and Stress in the City.
Yeah. So I'm happy to talk about it. Like you say, it's all in my book, Stress in the City, Playing My Way Out of Depression. So it's quite public in some ways. But about 10, 11 years ago, I experienced a really serious period of clinical depression. I think there's burnout included in it. And burnout, I think the official definition from the World Health Organization, it includes things like extreme exhaustion, fatigue, unable to concentrate, which overlapped a bit with also the symptoms of depression at that time.
Yeah.
I also attempted to take my own life a few times in those 2-3 years of painful times. And that sense of despair, powerlessness, hopelessness, helplessness was a sensation that I had never felt before to that extent about a decade ago. So when this happened, I didn't understand what mental health was. And it's only now, when I look back, or when I started writing about it, when I started my work, that I start to understand, oh, this is the concept of it, and also how I had contributed to some of the stigma and taboo and biases towards the topic. Because when I was first diagnosed with depression, I felt like I had failed. Like I was a failure, I was weak, I felt like I used to be the trophy daughter, and now I've brought shame to my whole family. I couldn't talk to my managers, my colleagues, that sense of, whoa, what's happened to me? and a question of what have I done wrong to merit this, because it felt like everything was going well. The job was going well. I had a cushy job. I had a boyfriend. I was young enough. And so it was really a shock to the system when this happened.
Mm.
And I think now as I look back, it felt like it was also a message to me that who I think I was then and who I really am, and also the Enoch who wanted to meet society's expectations, or what she thought was society's expectations, was just pulled in so many different directions that something just said stop, like just stop running, stop chasing all these things, and think about it. And I think in some ways the depression was a message to me of just think, just look at yourself and what's going on. And so for about 2-3 years it was painful. I remember times where I would just lay there on the floor in the living room and cry, and I don't even know what I was crying about, but the tears would come out. And then there are days of rage and then frustration, and then there are days where I just stayed in my bed for 2-3 days straight. I didn't eat, lost interest in a lot of things. I obviously had to stop going to work, and I also decided in the end to quit my job and just say, look, I need to focus on myself at the moment.
Mm.
And I think there were lots of times where the thoughts keep ruminating, and so it brings me to a state where cognitively I understand there is light at the end of the tunnel, that this too shall pass. But in that moment, it was so unbearable, or even the thought of, well, even if I got better, or even when I get to the end of the tunnel, then what? So what? There is no point. And so the meaninglessness of my life and everything I was doing, my being, the world, everything, also brought me a few times to saying, well, I think I've had it enough on this world, and said, this is the end, and I don't want to continue living anymore.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, with having a daughter who took her life, I can made a lot of thoughts about it since 4 or 5 years ago, and that. I mean, I went through the depression, and I sometimes think I'm still there. I just don't. I don't know if you have that same feeling. It's like, will I ever really ever be out of this? Is this just like part of who I am? If you know what I mean.
Yeah. And I relate to that, because I think having written and thought about it and worked in this space for almost 10 years now, I'm also at a point where I see depression or anxiety, or what we call mental health conditions, in a different light of, is it really a problem to be fixed? I understand the implications of it, but is it not in some ways a state of mind? And can we, instead of trying to treat it, can we also look at it from a perspective of understanding the meaning of it and the message that it brings, and how it and you probably know this more than me, and I'm ashamed to say, as a Chinese person, I don't know enough about our own country's philosophy, but I would say that in some of our philosophy, in our poetry, in our history, or in a lot of Eastern thought, something that we term depression is also considered a fluid state of mind. And it is and it isn't, right? And so I'm also, in a philosophical way, trying to reconcile, how do I make meaning of it? Because I've had depressive episodes over the last 10 years, and actually towards the end of last year, the last 3 months, was probably it was the worst episode I've had since 10 years ago. And I got to a point where I cognitively knew, and I reached out for support to the people that are there for me in my emergency time, to say, look, I'm thinking about killing myself, and I know this is what I'm doing to prepare, and you need to be there and check on me.
Yeah.
So it got to that extent again where I felt numb. And so I think it keeps coming. And each time it comes, I like to engage with it and just say, look, dear old friend, you're back again. What are you trying to tell me this time?
Yeah, it's interesting. You're making me think. They have the 5 transformations in the Chinese. I'm not sure what is it, Chinese medicine. They have Jing Qi Shan Shu Wu, and it's like the essence, the energy, the spirit, the emptiness, the oneness. And I wonder if we get, well, we do get lost in the emptiness, like before we realize, oh, there's a oneness. But I mean, also, we were talking about these layers of being, and I'm so reminded that we tend to attach to, I'm a girlfriend, boyfriend, I'm a successful da-di-da, I'm a whatever you're saying you are,
Yeah.
is actually disconnecting you from who you are, really. Do you know what I mean? Like you're unable, sometimes that the layers are so, in our mind, they're so inflexible that we feel they're straitjackets and we can't be ourselves in those layers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. My experience of it is when we talk about the identities and roles, which, the examples you gave, what it does is that it starts to put boxes somehow in our head of, if I were a mother, this is the kind of mother I need to be or want to be. I do think that identity is part of us, but perhaps what we are doing is we're not looking at all of these identities comprehensively and understanding they are all part of us. And we move between them with a complexity that I don't think we completely understand. So I think what you were describing is that splitting off of, I need to now fit into the mold of this identity. And then so who am I? Or the holistic me just gets lost in that sort of, oh, I need to now fit into this mold. And then there is still Enoch there. And I think that's where I really had that lesson of actually defragmenting, and why the bears helped me. So one winter day in my depression, Tim, who was my boyfriend then and now my husband, he managed to drag me out into a shopping mall, and I probably hadn't left home for weeks or something. And we passed by a toy shop and I saw this bear, and in that moment, I think what crossed my mind was, oh, the bear's looking at me and it's smiling, and I smiled back, and Tim's like, wow, I haven't seen her smile in months. I'm going to get this bear. I don't care what magic it does. And that was the start of that part of the journey where he actually inspired a lot of it. I think the way he grew up in Australia is very different from the way I grew up in Hong Kong, with that kind of mindset. And he's always been creative and playful. And he was the one who asked me when we got home, why don't we give the bear a name? And I said, okay, Floppy, off the top of my head. And then he said, well, why Floppy? And I said, well, he doesn't do much. He flops on the sofa all day, watches TV, and eats mosquitoes. And back then I didn't have that knowledge. Now I have more of that knowledge to understand that was possibly an expression of my unconscious mind and my unconscious feelings of actually that was me, but it was too hard to look at myself. So let me put it onto this cute bear. It's the bear that's flopping around doing nothing, having no meaning in his life, and it's not me. And as the bear collection continued, and my friends got bears of different colors and shapes and sizes, each one had a name, had a personality, and I think, all of them are reminiscences of me. It's that metaphor of, who am I? There's all these bits. There's a bits where I would aspire to be like some chili bear who's a little bit more chilled out and relaxed, and it doesn't matter. But I probably identify a lot more with Fuzzy Bear, who's a little bit calculating, and Snobby Bear, who's snobbish, and busy bear who's just running around not knowing what they're doing all the time, what he's doing all the time. So I think it was that's helped me defragment who I was, or the multifaceted layers and bits, and then slowly reintegrate to go, okay, I'm getting to know myself now and getting to accept that there are parts that I may not like so much, but then it's also me, and
Which, that kind of brings me back to what you said, I'm a paradox, because you've got these parts that don't really sort of fit together. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I want to be that and I want to be that at the same time, and I can't, yeah? And then that's a nice reflection on that. Also, you remind me, I kind of thinking about how the Greeks had, we tend to have in a Western Western culture, we tend to have this one god, and the Greeks had many gods. It's sort of like it had to be a family, it had to be, you have to have a bad god, and he's always doing naughty stuff, and he's out, he's a bit like he's out, meeting a lot of women, and then he tricks them, he turns into a bull, and and then rides away onto an island and then seduces them, and it's Zeus, and I think it's Paris, or I'm not even sure, Persephone or whoever it is. And they've all got their different roles, and I'm like thinking, well, it's almost like again, they're in a way like different parts of personality. Have you ever, I'm just going to make a little twist here, have you ever worked with masks? Because I find masks are amazing to sort of be you and then be another you. So you sort of put on you make a mask, which is an alter ego, and then you kind of go, I'm going to now be the mask, and you allow an expression of yourself to come out that doesn't normally come out.
I haven't directly, but the concept I have worked with or played with in the workshops and trainings we've done, where people speak through their toys or their objects, and they become that, but because it's a toy or an object, some of them bring stuffed toys, some of them bring like a postcard case, whatnot, it can be anything, and they start to adopt this persona of, if I was this, what kind of a postcard would I be? And because it's their thing, they also have an emotional attachment to it. And what I've seen in doing some of those, I've asked people to talk to each other through their toys as well in a coaching conversation, or like using a coaching technique in order to dig deeper and find out more about how we see mental health, for example. And because there is that play, it's also a little bit silly, a little bit fun. They get it relaxes them, and they start really talking about what they think inside and feel inside, instead of that I need to be strong and happy all the time. And I think taking up that persona also gives them a sense of freedom, because if something came out and they didn't like it, they'd be like, oh, it was the bear, it wasn't me. Or it was a postcard, it wasn't me. It was my candle, it wasn't me. And I think in some ways it's helpful, because I'm not trying to get people to see everything deep in one go. I'm trying to create the opportunity for them to have a method of learning about themselves, and specifically tying it in with their mental health. And then as and when they're ready, I think they will continue to dig or reflect. And if they don't want to do it, fine. I think the mind can also only take so much in one go to process and make meaning of things. So, but the masks are a good idea. So maybe you're just giving me an idea to try something next time. And now, because everybody has to wear masks, a different kind of face mask, but at least it hides some part of us, and maybe there's something fun to do with it.
Well, there's Rudolf Steiner in his school in Ottersberg in Germany. They have one of the professors is the mask professor, and he teaches people to make the mask, and the making of the mask can be, you can make your your wicked mask, and you can make your, you know, your
Yeah.
good mask, or you can make a
Yeah.
mask of somebody else that you had difficulty dealing with, and then you can put it on. I mean, it's a lot of flexibility in masks, and I used to do it
Yeah.
when I was teaching some energy work, because people would say I can't do it. So I said, okay, just put on a mask and hide behind it. So I'd have these blank masks, and I'd say, okay, um, you behind the mask don't think you can do it, but the mask, apparently it's giving the impression that you can. So just say whatever you say and do what I explain to you without worrying. And they had
Yeah.
yeah, it was kind of fun. I mean, I did it as a bit of an experiment, but yeah, it's kind of fun.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah. I think for a lot of people, it's a lot of this kind of work and thoughts are quite exposing. And if we don't have the habit or the tools to help ourselves, then it actually can feel very self-conscious because we're not used to that kind of raw connection with other people. So for somebody I've seen in workshops where once they relate to me or our trainers' stories of our personal experiences, they suddenly open up. And I've had people pour out their life stories to us because it was almost the first time they have ever had that space where they felt seen and understood enough to talk about how they really feel. And short of it being therapy, because that's where I draw the line in our work, is I'm much more around psychosocial education and awareness. And
yeah,
if somebody really chooses to go to therapy, I would refer them. And I think that's actually some of the major impact of our work. It's people feel that liberty and freedom to say, I can be myself. I can talk about my pain and no one's going to judge me for it. And realizing that perhaps everybody in the room has had some sort of experience, and suddenly I think they see each other in a different light. So for a company, it also builds that sense of connection inside a team because they see each other as people and not just as a colleague. And they start to understand that we all have our fragilities. And so I think that's also the understanding is where a lot of the empathy comes out from, of understanding, okay, I've had my challenges, I have history, this person across from everyone has their story that we can't read. So can we
yeah.
be a bit more patient with each other when
It,
things happen?
yeah, I can confirm that. You know, I did. I was invited by Mind Hong Kong to be one of their mental health first aid trainers, and then to stand in the room and say, okay, I'm going to tell you what it feels like when you want to kill yourself, and I'm going to tell you what it feels like when you're depressed, and I'm doing this because I'm going to go first. It's like I'm not going to wait for somebody here to be vulnerable. I'm going to make myself vulnerable. I'm going to go first. I'm going to tell you like the shit, excuse my French, the worst experiences of my life, where it's like I always say my um, worst suicidal moments were not wanting to live more than not wanting to die. I just didn't want to live. That was the worst thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And then absolutely, like you say, like people just going, wow, I can open up now because somebody's, if they're strong enough to say that to a whole group of people, then but I find it quite draining. I don't find it easy to be that advocate. Do you have the same experience? To kind of it's sort of like
I do. I do. And actually I was making sense of some of my part of my depressive episode at the end of last year. And I think that was part of it, where the last few years I have been very public. The book, talks, the panel discussions, articles, really pumping up the work, building the brand of Bearapy, having a team. So there was a lot of public exposure and public discussion about the journey. And I think sometimes when that happens, I also, and because of my own experience, I think in depression, I've also become quite sensitive to emotions in the room and picking up, especially picking up thoughts that people aren't articulating. That I can feel it in the room, and I have an intuition about what's going on. And I think when I'm in a space and there's about 100 people all feeling and thinking similar things but not talking about it, I pick up the pain. But because there's nowhere for it to go, then it starts to take the energy away from me. And I think there's also another bit where being so public with it, people also start to form an image of me that I felt quite pulled into and drawn to filling.
Yeah.
Say, I need to be that in their mind. And it was particularly pertinent. I think there was one talk where I decided I am going to say what I really think instead of what I think they want to hear. And what I mean by that is, I think 2-3 years ago when I would do these talks, I get the sense that people want to know the solution. They want to know the 5 steps to prevent depression. They want to know, how do I get out of burnout? And I try to meet that because I do say, well, if that's helpful, then these are what I do. But slowly, as my own thinking developed, I also started to think, well, actually, it's not so easy to prevent. And I don't intentionally say, this is how I prevent it. Rather, I've gotten to a point where I now know how to live with it when it comes. And I also don't want to give people that false idea that once you get out of depression, that's the end. And if anything, most of the people I work with, even internationally, who have this lived experience, it comes back. It comes back, and I don't want people to think you get out of it once and that's it. And so when I decided to switch or to be more open with, well, this is really the dilemmas that I'm grappling with around mental health, I think it was met with a bit of shock and surprise, because when people come, they want a solution and they want to be told it's going to be okay. And when they ask me a question of, well, how do you build resilience? And my answer is, well, you go through the pain. They're a bit like, huh? Like that doesn't work. That's not what we want. So I think those public, speaking about it already is draining. There are times when I emotionally go back to that experience to be able to tell that story. So that also, for me, emotionally, it's taxing. And I think it's just when there's too many people around, and even the last week or so, because we've been recruiting new joiners to our team and volunteers, most of them are curious as to why I started this work. So I've been telling my story about maybe 5 or 6 times in the last 2 weeks. And,
Right.
and I do find that sort of helpful for them, but I need a lot of time to recuperate, especially when I find energy in being alone.
Yeah, I mean, on that note, you see, I maybe you'll relate to this. When I was low, and I would say, like, okay, my daughter's, recently died and she took her life. People would go down to my level and bring me further down. Do you know what I mean? Like their energy would go, oh no, and I would go, oh God, and they even to the point that people would cry and be inconsolable in front of me, and I'm like, actually, I don't
You
have
to comfort them instead.
I don't have the energy to comfort you right now. Yeah. Literally somebody crying for 30 minutes and, it's having dinner with them the whole time. They're just in tears. I'm like, okay. Yeah. And so while you want to be genuine, because we have a cognitive dissonance when we are in a way narcissistic, when we put up an image of ourselves which is an image that we want other people to see rather than the true image. Then we have these inner conflicts, and then they're exhausting in themselves. And it even goes with when we're trying to teach mental health, it actually can catch up with us. It's like, that's not fair. That shouldn't be like that, should it? We should feel fantastic.
And I think the whole irony of burning myself out sometimes, trying to help people not to feel burnout. And I do recognize that irony in it. And I think part of it for me, why I feel like it's such a paradox is, or maybe I think the exhaustion comes from in trying to deny our paradoxes, because I think everyone has it. And somehow, somewhere along the way, we have this idea that if we are happy, we can't be sad. But we can be happy and sad at the same time. We can be grateful and also complaining at the same time. And I think it is, and I read an article once, I can't remember where it was, but I thought it was a very good article where it says it's not about trying to iron out the paradoxes, but to accept that life is just a paradox. And to be okay with all these different so-called conflicting ideas and emotions, and to start to see them as not being mutually exclusive.
Well, if I ever publish this book, that I talk exactly about that, because I talk about Tai Chi. And Tai Chi, you know, as Tai Chi is the mother of yin and yang. So that means they are one. Yin and yang are one. It's not, they are not in conflict in Tai Chi.
No, they're not.
They're in the mother.
You can't not have.
So, so I talk a lot about that in my book. And it's not Tai Chi Chuan, it's like this philosophy of Tai Chi. I think it's the same with this whole mania that we have to feel safe and to feel stable and to feel like we've achieved something. It's like manic. And these are all things which are incredibly temporary, incredibly ephemeral, because they're going to go away. And in a way, I think like the ultimate expression of how ephemeral they are is to take your life and say, like, this doesn't, and none of this matters. None of this matters. Of course, then we are faced, I believe, because of my experiences with energy, we're faced with another conundrum, that we had the opportunity of life and we gave it up, and there's something that we were missing, and we'll probably have to come back and do it all again. And then that's really kind of like, this was not worth it. This was a bit of a waste of time. So that's where I view it. Did you have any like spiritual experiences when you were like in your depression? Did you have any like lights, or you had a bear that smiled at you, which is something?
Yeah, I had I remember a few points in time where, and I'm struggling with words, because I, to this day, can't tell if I actually saw them or I thought I saw them. But there were a time where I was in the bathtub crying, and it felt like, and I saw Angel Gabriel sitting at the end of the bathtub, just being with me. And then I thought, and I think I wrote about this in the book as well, I thought I saw outside my window Elijah and the chariots of fire come down. And I said to Tim, he's come to take me now. I can go now. I think I was trying to get out the window, but the windows out of my living room, only the two side windows can open. And so the middle part actually can't open. And to this day, I still am not quite sure how to understand it. And I think this experience actually has opened my mind in a way to at least not reject the things that I don't know. Because I think before this experience, I was quite absolute in, and having grown up in a Christian family and religion, I had the dogma that anything not this was bad. And so I think in my mind, I kind of go, well, if this wasn't this, and I can't say it was the preacher or what it was, I think a lot of it was also my own interpretation of it. And this experience really helped me open my mind to go, well, maybe, or at least possibility of, or at least learn a bit about it before I reject it as superstition or weird or crazy, whatnot. And the last year or so, I've also, because I remember when I was in my depression, one of my friends here in Beijing wanted me to go see a Reiki master. And I had no idea what Reiki was, what chakras were. When she told me, I was like, oh, that's weird. No, thank you. And maybe about 2-3 years ago, I started being more open to these ideas. Partly also some of my friends around me were talking about it. I was less rejecting of it. And I go, okay, this is a curiosity. Can I at least understand it? And so the last year or so, I've also been reading different books on past life regressions. I'm speaking to a friend about soul contracts. I used to think tarot cards and oracle cards were, you know, that old lady in a dark room with a crystal ball, and now I'm like, okay, well, you know, if people are looking at it, at least I can look at it from a curious standpoint and see why and what it does. So I've been looking at all these things which 10 years ago I would have completely, very quickly disregarded as like a conman, or you know, somebody making something up, and who would be quote unquote stupid enough to believe it. And so when you say spiritual experiences, I think what the experience has brought me is to actually question, what does spirituality mean for me? And religion is but one thing in it. And also I think religion is much more for me now rituals. It doesn't necessarily mean beliefs. So going to church is a ritual, but what I believe of the church, that's something else. And so I don't have an answer. I'm still in that process of understanding. And I also started practicing calligraphy and a bit of Tai Chi with my teacher. We've been studying some of the ancient Chinese literature and understanding some of that from purely like an intellectual perspective, but it has helped me think about Buddhism. It has helped me think about what we call Confucianism, the philosophies of the doctrine of the mean. How do we learn what is actually virtue? It's not really just knowing when to bow or where to stand. Like, I think in the modern day, we've taken it very literally.
Yeah.
Of this is the routine, this is the way to do things, without understanding the meaning behind it. And I think if I understand, my shallow understanding of it is, those were examples of what striving for virtue is, but virtue in itself, it's something much deeper than that, of simply knowing where to stand and who gets to eat first at the dining table.
Right. Yeah, totally. I mean, I read this, John Stewart at the owner at Kamalaya recommended a book to me by Karen Armstrong, and I think it was called The Great Awakening. And it was the journey of all of the philosophies from Asia through the Middle East and so on. And it was Confucius that made the golden rule, which was essentially treat other people as you would like to be treated, or something like that. And you see it actually. And golden. Why? I said, well, why is it golden? He said, well, because gold is a metal that can't be corrupted. It doesn't rust like other metals. They oxidize, but gold, it stays the same. It will never sort of change. And I'm reminded again of it's pointing towards oneness. And there you have your paradox again. Yeah. That we are two and we are one. I should treat you as I treat myself. But am I prepared to do that? And am I prepared to do that for myself? And am I prepared to treat myself so nicely, maybe? Or am I prepared? So it is really, really interesting. And I think, I think the most spiritual people are down to earth. They're very, very down to earth. I would say, forgiveness is, I went away from, intellectually away from Christianity because of my interest in Taoism and Kung Fu and everything else. And yet you couldn't express anything more simply than forgive, love one another and forgive each other, because forgiveness is if God forgives you in the Judeo-Christian tradition, he forgives your original sin. You return to paradise, to complete innocence in the Garden of Eden. Everything is one again. Yeah. And so I think it's just like, it's a wonderful, wonderful philosophy. But again, how do we deal with it on a daily life? And I suppose we get our bears out and we
But I think, with the spirituality side, part of because it resonated with me what you said of, it wasn't so much wanting to die, but rather not wanting to live. And I think a lot of people don't understand this about people who are suicidal. It's not so much we're seeking death, but we're avoiding life. And is there something in between? And what I've learnt there, and at least my reflection throughout that process was, I don't think we contemplate enough about death, what it means, and what it means to us, each person individually. Like, what is it? Because the easiest way to think about it is physically, our heart don't pump anymore. But is it the end? I've no idea. I've not actually died before. I don't know what goes around. Does it come back around? But I think it is also in that fear of death. Like you say, the metaphor of uncertainty is death. It's like the fear of death, our mortality, that all these things will come to an end, that we seem to put too much weight on life, like living and breathing. Because I've never quite understood why people would say to me, you shouldn't die. When I share some of my suicidal thoughts, and when I say, well, why? They would say, well, your friends will miss you, your kids will miss you, people will be sad. And I'm like, well, but that's about them, it's not about me. So is it that I have to stay alive so that they can avoid their grief? And I know it's hurtful to say some of these things, and I know some people would call it selfish, whatnot, but I'm trying to look at it also as trying to help us at least reflect on, why would I hold that point of view? And I think a lot of people don't actually ask themselves that question. And that for me is also the self-awareness of, if I play with bears and people think I'm crazy, then I also go, well, why not? And people don't really think about that either, or they have that judgment of, you're almost 40, you should be playing with bears. And I'm like, well, why not? Or play shouldn't be at work. Why not? And I think it's a lot of us accept so much of the dialogue that just goes round, especially with social media, and accepting it without really thinking, why do I accept it and why do I not accept it? I think even in the whole mental health space, where suicide prevention, and I've been to I think it was a few years ago, where event on either World Mental Health Day or World Health Day, when depression was a theme, and I heard a doctor on stage say, well, the way to prevent suicide is to tell your kids that they shouldn't do so. And I'm like, I don't think that's going to work very well. Or that you tell them it's bad and they should never do that and they should never think of that. And I think that's part of a whole culture of learning, where you just don't think about it, just say it's bad, it's wrong, it will be penalized, without actually explaining why. And I think that actually takes us to a space where, as we grow up, then we grapple and we ask those questions, and then we get super confused because we've actually never really thought about it, or nobody has explained to us why.
Yeah, I mean, it was something that I was really contemplating after Emma died, was just, if I do sex education, I get less unwanted pregnancies, I get less sexually transmitted diseases. If I do drug education, I have less people taking drugs, I have less people dying of overdoses and so on. Why would I not do suicide education? Why would I not talk about that? That would seem like, especially with an epidemic of youth suicide, wouldn't it make sense to talk about it? No? But the theory you want to look at is terror management theory by Solomon, some Eastern European name. I can't remember. It's like a very interesting name.
I'll look it up.
And but it's based on the philosophy of Ernest Becker, Professor Ernest Becker, and it essentially says our reason to live, and this is what Socrates says. It says philosophy is for preparation for death. Our reason for living is all about our fear of death. And when I heard their talk, and I was like, well, that's really interesting, because when you're threatened, or even a society is threatened, and we saw this with certain political campaigns, that in the past the Nazis made everybody terribly afraid of the Jews, and they were a big threat, and then people become very conservative and they become very protective, and they become more likely to become nationalistic. And we currently have a situation where everybody is terrified. And so we have a kind of almost a dangerous situation where people can easily, because of their fear of death, they can easily become very conservative. So
I was reminded, I was at the Hong Kong Mental Health Conference, I think it was 2 years ago, and I was able to do a short talk there, but I remember one of the keynote speakers, and she said, which I tend to agree, that the work around suicide prevention is much more around knowing that when the person at the end decides to end their own lives, that we have done everything that we could to help them understand there are alternatives. And at the end, if it was their decision, that's their decision. And I think that's the bit where I gravitate towards in our work with mental health, because a lot of people take these decisions without knowing, without understanding what they're going through, without the awareness that this is how they are feeling. And so with building the awareness, I'm hoping that people can in some ways make more informed decisions. And of course, if we can help them through that time where they change their mind, then all the better. But I think our work is really about helping people gain that awareness so that they actually know what choices they are making. I think a lot of people who are in that state of mind aren't even aware that they are going through this. So of course, then for them, it's
Yeah.
there's no choice, there's no alternative. They feel compelled to. Right?
Well, I think if we're talking about that dichotomy of stability, instability, and instability means death, and stability means safety and life. And then they are in such an awful situation that they feel like, well, death means stability. Death is actually symbolizes stability for me now. It's like it's over, it's done. I'm out of here. Yeah.
That's yeah.
That's when we got the problem. That's when we got the problem. And so our dichotomy is really about living in embracing the instability, and it's the instability. It's like the only thing I can guarantee you in life is things will change. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the only stable thing is change. Yeah. So and we don't know what's
Isn't
after.
there a saying? No, we don't. But I thought there's a saying where, and I think I wrote about it on my blog, where I heard this saying the first time in the movie Meet Joe Black, which was, was such an old movie, but it says, nothing is certain except death and taxes.
Right.
And even then, I think what I wrote was, even with taxes, you can evade. So really the only certainty is death, which, like you say, is a paradox. It's certain that it is the end in some way, but the uncertainty of, well, what is it really? Because nobody really knows. And maybe, I can't say that, because there are people who say that they can see the afterlife, or they've come back from it, or whatnot. And I'm not one to say that's not true or not, but at least in my own understanding.
Have you had an out-of-body experience?
Not exactly, I don't think. There has been experiences where I did feel like almost as if I had come out of my body, but and it was really interesting, because there was a time where an incident or encounter with a person where in that moment I felt some energy, and I describe it as a very intensive falling in love experience. And it was almost like time stood still and everything stood still, and I could see myself. Like I felt like I was out, and I could look into the situation, and I could see myself in the person. I don't know if that was an out-of-body experience or not, but that was what the sensation felt like.
Because in a lot of ways, I think that one of the things we should do to help people with mental health is give them out-of-body experiences, and let them experience leaving the body, going somewhere else, experiencing different realms, and then going, okay, so I'm here for a bit. Yeah. This is not, I mean, whether it's true or not, certainly people that have out-of-body experiences, their whole fear of death or their whole perception of themselves changes, and kind of that's kind of what we're about, is helping people, see that there is something else, which is why I started the Discover Energy Work podcast, was to say, guys, there's so much out there, you just wouldn't believe it, and it's great. It's great that we can explore. I think my time is coming up.
I don't know enough about. Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I don't know enough about out-of-body experience, but at one point, a friend of mine and I were thinking about using virtual reality to give people something similar, where people who have not experienced depression, anxiety before, is there a way to engineer that sensation for them to understand what it is like? And I haven't been to see it yet, but from what I understand, there's a hospital in Hong Kong who has started using that as part of their psychosocial education. And I was hoping that this year I'd go and experience it and see it, but of course that's going to be postponed. So it's an engineered experience in some ways. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know that from the rubber hand experiment. Do you know the rubber hand experiment?
No.
Oh, okay. So the rubber hand experiment is where you're sitting at a table and they put a rubber hand in front of you, and then they put a blanket over your shoulder, and it covers your arm, and it looks like that rubber hand is your hand. Yeah. And then they put a barrier next to your, so there's my hand, and they put a barrier next to your hand. Yeah. And next to the rubber hand, and your hand is now like the other side of the barrier. There's the barrier. And then they take a brush and they brush the middle the little finger on the rubber hand and your hand at the same time, but you can't see your hand. You can only see the rubber hand. And you get the feeling that the rubber hand is your hand. And then they do things like they take fire towards it, and hypnotists have done it, and the people are actually feeling the heat. Or they take a hammer and they hit it with a hammer, and the person pulls their arm away, although they cognitively know it's not their hand. So in my thesis for psychology, I wrote that I found that there were people doing that with virtual reality, and they were taking people out of their bodies and experiencing themselves out of their bodies. So I said, we don't know that very much in psychology. We really don't even know what the self is. Like, come on, guys, stop kidding ourselves. I love psychology. It's a baby. It's got so much to learn, but we really don't know much. And what we do know is fascinating.
We could talk. I'll look up that rubber hand.
Yeah. Oh yes. Well, we could talk for air. I can tell we can talk for hours, but we'll have to push. I have to push stop on my record, and we can continue talking, or we'll come back and talk again.
I'm happy to end as well, because I'm also starting to get quite tired, as well.
That's cool. Well, thank you so much for coming. I'm sure people will love to hear all the things you've said.
I always find I feel the self-consciousness of will they listen to the podcast and then think I'm really weird, and that of course is a self-judgment and that sort of society's expectation of does it gel with my LinkedIn image kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh, if they think I'm weird, if I'd had that thought, I'd think, I hope they think I'm weird. Yeah. It's hardly seems worth it if they don't. Yeah.